I've got nerves since this is the first of the meetings that I'm formally chairing. Without the Aaron Keatley, acting director, was not available today, and James is not able to be present here to chair, so I'm stepping in. And then I'll talk a lot as usual about other things. We're going to go ahead and begin the recording. Jim, just making sure that's a note for everyone on the call to know that this is recorded. Again, thanks everyone for coming. Corey Connolly, I lead the Office of Climate and Energy for EGLE here and for the state of Michigan. This is our second meeting of the Council on Climate Solutions of 2023 and our 22nd meeting of the council overall. Our last council meeting was February 28th. At this point, I'm going to go ahead and go through roll call and ask everyone to, I'll just go down the list and we will track in our notes attendance before going through adoption of the agenda and adoption of meeting minutes. And then we'll get into the content. So from the top, apologies to the folks at the end of the alphabet, Director Boring.
I'm here from MDART, Kathy Anger.
Great. Frank Beaver.
Good afternoon. I'm here. Thank you.
Director Corbin. Or Judd.
Yeah, hello, this is Judd Herzer, attending on behalf of Susan Corbin.
Carrie Dugan.
Present.
Treasurer Eubanks or designee.
Yeah, Larry Steckelberg with Treasury.
Jim Harrison. Not hearing Jim. Director Hertel or Megan Rowe. Right. Not hearing anyone from DHHS. If there's someone else from DHHS that's standing in, you can speak up now. Brandon Hoffmeister.
I'm here.
Marnice Jackson.
I'm present.
Kevin Kolivar. Not hearing Kevin. Acting Director Lott or Scott Whitcomb. Right. Not hearing anyone from DNR. Phyllis Meadows. Right. Quentin Messer or a designee.
Did you say my name? I'm here. Yeah. Sorry.
I've been trying to be formal with everyone, and then I just.
I know. All of a sudden, I'm just
like. Tanya Kozlowski.
Here, bro.
Phil Roos. Here. Chair Dan Scripps. I think I saw him on there. Well, we can check to see if he's in attendance. I think he's on. Darrell Slaughter. Sam Stolper.
Hey, Corey. Hey, everyone.
Ron Vogelweed.
Yes, I'm here.
Brad Weifreck, Acting Director Weifreck.
Niles Anlin, sitting in for Acting Director.
Thanks, Niles. Cynthia Williams.
I'm here.
All right, great. Welcome, everyone. Good to see many of you on video here. Now we need to adopt the agenda. So our draft agenda was sent to council members on Wednesday, May 17th. Do I have a motion to adopt?
Motion.
In a second?
Second.
Great. I was worried Jarrell's normally like the quickest second in the room, so I was
We'll try
worried
to
about
speed
that.
it up here.
So it's been moved and seconded that today's agenda be adopted. Any discussion? Hearing none, those in favor, council members in favor say aye.
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 Those opposed, I had to give the mute opportunity. Motion is adopted. Adoption of February 28th meeting minutes. So again, draft minutes were sent to council members on Wednesday, May 17th. I call for a motion to approve the minutes. Great. Do I have a second? Great. So we got Tanya moving and Phil seconding here in the room. So it's been moved and seconded that the February 28th meetings be approved. Any discussion? Hearing none. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no. Nay. Either one?
The British version.
Yeah, exactly. So the motion is approved. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and be a little bit less rigid here and get into a few items. One, just a note for council members, we did circulate a survey for council members and designees, originally sent in April. We've reopened it. It closes at the end of this week. Primarily looking for updates from you all. We want to be able to include that and uplift any of the work that you're doing that helps us pursue the goals of the My Healthy Climate Plan and climate action at large, and uncover opportunities for collaboration. And so if you're able to fill that survey out, we'd appreciate it. Again, it closes on the 26th here. And we can absolutely resend. Sarah, can you make sure that we resend that? Thanks. Great. So today's agenda, we're going to go through and I'll provide a quick update on some of the activities since our last meeting. It has been a busy stretch in terms of climate action, and I'm sure I'll miss stuff. So hopefully folks will feel comfortable jumping in and sharing any really exciting updates that you all have. We'll go through a couple of the big, in a little bit more detail, a couple of big federal funding opportunities that we've seen action on since our last meeting and kind of what to expect there. And then a brief recap of the My Healthy Climate Conference, which I can't believe that happened since our last meeting. It feels like it was ages ago, kind of. But we'll go over that, and then we'd like to facilitate a discussion amongst the council members about that experience and about the conference and thinking about what was successful and what we hope to see, assuming we do another conference next year, which we intend to do. And then we're joined later by the team at MDARD from Kathy Anger and John Malik to speak about the work that MDARD is doing on climate action, and really excited to see to be able to share what the department's been really leading on, and some of the opportunities coming up. And then we have Jacob Corbidet joining from RMI to speak about the major opportunities in front of us with the tax credits under the IRA and how to best leverage those, and kind of some of the updates on that and timing. So with that, I'll go ahead and dive into my update, unless I'm going to pause quickly because I'm not used to chairing and make sure no one sees any reason why I need to do anything else before I move forward. Great. I was just making sure. So I walked through the agenda, and it turns out I had an agenda slide. So I'll pause here so you all can pick up on what I just said, and then I'll dig into our updates here. So some of the major updates, high level, since our last conversation. Also climate energy, I went in front of the House Energy and Environment Committee, as well as the House Energy Communications and Technology Committee, and then the Senate Energy and Environment Committee to speak about the My Healthy Climate Plan and some of the legislative options that could be pursued toward implementation. It was a very, I'm used to, in a past life, I presented in front of committees often, and I usually had 5 to 10 minutes, and then they wanted me out of there. We were there for an hour and 15 for each of those, and the legislators were very engaged and very interested in what that looks like and what some of the policy options are. And I think even the chair of the Senate Energy Committee quoted it either the day before or the day after and said that the My Healthy Climate Plan is a framework for what they're intending to pursue in the committee. So something that was really exciting for our work, and that happened right after our last meeting, so March 1st and March 9th, respectively. We launched a climate bulletin to update folks on what's going on with the Office of Climate and Energy and to share more about climate across Eagle, but our office, Eagle, and broadly across the state. And we can share, and we will share information about signing up for that.
Nicole,
Yeah.
can you share your slides? I don't think it's showing up on the screen.
Yeah, it'll show up here.
Oh.
If you're trying to share something.
Wow. I am so sorry. This is the type of thing that I should have figured out much sooner. Sorry about that,
I
everyone.
think the mind was affected though.
Yeah, just telling people that you
You're
can
with
see
you.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah, you could see it in your
Oh, yeah.
mind. Yeah, apologies, everyone. All right. There you go. See, everyone thought I was crazy when I stopped and I was like, is there anything else I need to think about here before we record? That was the moment to share your slides. Anyway, thanks everyone for bearing with me on that. So now you have this in front of you. The climate bulletin I was just mentioning, legislation, we'll talk a little bit more about this. It's not exactly the My Healthy Climate Plan, but there has been a series of bills introduced that touch on pieces of the My Healthy Climate Plan. And we've seen that kind of come through. And for our office, what that looks like is we have a lot of bills we're summarizing right now. But also it just means there's a lot more activity and interest in the legislature, I think, generally. The My Healthy Climate Corps, we received a $70,000 planning grant and are really kicking off that work right now. That'll eventually, we have a $2.1 million line item in the budget that we expect to come through. It's a combination of federal dollars and state match to launch that kind of first round of the My Healthy Climate Corps. So we kicked off that work. On federal funding, we'll talk in more detail in a second, but Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund saw updated guidance, so we've been deep on that. And then the EPA's Climate Pollution Reduction Grant Program, which we had a presentation on from Evergreen Action at our last meeting, has since, there's been a lot of activity there, including, and I'll get into it in a little more detail in a second, but including the Office of Climate and Energy being named the lead on behalf of the state of Michigan to pursue that funding opportunity. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that looks like and what comes next. And then, of course, we had our climate conference and all of the incredible things that existed around that happened in early April, and appreciated so many of you attending, and it was great to see so many of the folks here at the joint luncheon between the Michigan Advisory Council on Environmental Justice and the Council on Climate Solutions. That I was very, Regina and I were both very pleased, and it was heartwarming, genuinely, to see everyone there having conversations and building stronger relationships. So, and I think that's the first time that's ever happened that the two councils have met. So, a very fun feature of the climate conference. Since our last meeting, we've also seen a couple of updates on data related to implementation of the climate plan. Again, it's not specifically from measures from the climate plan, but we've seen a share, the latest data is now available. So the share of renewables has increased from, you can see 10.72% to 12.92%. Share of carbon-free energy has decreased. Carbon-free in this situation would include renewables, but also it includes the, I mean, the main thing areas, it includes nuclear and Palisades. I think accounts for pretty much that 5%. Somebody more familiar, maybe from the commission, could correct me if I'm wrong, but that's what I think that is the result of that. Share coal has decreased, share natural gas has increased, and it basically, just to remind folks, we were trying to pull together whatever data is available at each of these meetings, and then we capture it and we'll consolidate it all into our annual report. But so we won't provide updates on every potential metric in the climate plan each time, just where there's a new update to be had.
Is that EPA or
Yeah. Yes, it is EIA data. That was the question. All right, so electric vehicle data-related updates. Saw increased number of EVs and plug-in hybrid electric vehicles by about 20%. Obviously, we know that this is in the context of us wanting to get to having the charging infrastructure to support 2 million electric vehicles on the road by 2030. So we've got some work to do, but it's great to see that increase. And then EV charging stations increased by 108 as an absolute number there. And you can kind of see the trend lines on your screen there between cumulative number of chargers in Michigan and the number of electric and plug-in hybrid electric vehicles on the road. And we'll continue to see, I think, as the NEVI funding rolls out and more programs roll out, I think the charging infrastructure will see kind of like a rapid increase on that. And again, we'll likely get additional data throughout the year, and if we get anything updated on these items, we'll be sure to share that.
Question, Corey, are those public charging stations, or does that include privately owned? Is that someone's residence?
It would not include at someone's residence, and I do not believe it would include in a private parking lot, but otherwise would, so basically publicly accessible in some manner.
Thank you.
Great.
And
so
another quick question with regard to the NEVI funding. Do you have an estimate on how many additional chargers that we're expecting in Michigan due to that funding?
I do not. Niles, is that something that you could speak to?
Yeah, Judd as well, correct me if I'm wrong, but the initial round, we're expecting 43 or 46 four-port stations. So it's about approximately 180 ports.
That's right. That round one funding, just to tag on a little bit more information, represents probably close to a third, maybe a little bit less than a third of the state's total formula allocation under NEVI. But you can kind of extrapolate those numbers out, but it's a little difficult to estimate right now what the total outcome will be, because once each of the alternative fuel corridors is completely built out to a ready status, then the state will have more flexibility with the resources that are remaining, meaning we could use those to continue to build out the DC fast chargers that are essentially required under the formula program for the alternative fuel corridors. But we could also, after reaching the ready status with each corridor, use those funds to install level 2 charging as well, which obviously are less expensive and you could deploy more. It just kind of depends on the site-by-site use cases and the types of applications that we receive through the program.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, thanks to both of you. And I'll just make a note for us, that might be a good topic for a future council meeting to have an update on NEVI, especially as it starts to roll out, and figure out how we all can be making sure to uplift and support that. Obviously, it's aligned with the climate plan. And, so Judd, Judd and Niles, we can follow up offline about that, but that might be something to think about in the future. Great, so that's it for the data-related updates. Now I want to get into a couple of the more detailed things that are, again, shaping our work, and update from our last council meeting. We had a pretty detailed presentation on the climate pollution reduction grants and the greenhouse gas reduction fund. So I'll talk about those two things now. I speak about the climate pollution reduction grants first because it's important framing for how the EPA is anticipating the usage of this. These are it's a total of a $5 billion program. To reiterate what we talked about on our last meeting, it's a $5 billion program, and there's a first round of $250 million for planning grants. The planning grants are necessary to inform what is applied for in the $4.6 billion competition. So the general intention is for a state like Michigan, like what we're doing, basically it's to produce something very similar to the My Healthy Climate Plan. There are some additional pieces to it, but basically this is money to do the planning that we largely have done in some cases. And so we're using the money to refine and then think strategically about how to best implement the climate plan and really get down to some of the nuts and bolts. So that sort of, in the framing there is important just because this is meant from the EPA to also be a jumping off point for other federal funding opportunities to pursue implementation of such a climate plan. So it is a centerpiece of climate action when it relates to federal funding, and will be a centerpiece and the defining feature of a lot of the work that we're doing. And it's the main source of funding for most of the work that our office is going to be doing over the next 4 years. So $3 million total award over 4 years to the Office of Climate and Energy. 2 major deliverables there. One is a priority climate action plan, and one is a comprehensive climate action plan. The My Healthy Climate Plan is sort of somewhere in between those two things. The priority climate action plan is meant to be a bit more specific and tailored to the top couple of, the top areas for action to prioritize for the first round of that, multi-billion-dollar grant competition. And then the comprehensive climate action plan is meant to be more economy-wide and comprehensive in nature, as the word obviously indicates. And you'll hear us refer to those as the PCAP and the CCAP. I'll try not to say that all the time, but for us, it's just inevitable in some ways. And again, the way we're approaching is building directly from the My Healthy Climate Plan. We expect, so we submitted our work plan to the EPA. We opted in as a state, named OCE as the lead and Eagle as the lead. We've submitted our work plan to EPA. They're providing us feedback on the work plan, and then we'll be moving forward from there. And we're also waiting for the funds to actually flow from the EPA and for the approval of the current FY23 supplemental budget, which is where this would sit in terms of an appropriation. Some of the key activities under this and things that we're really still wading through as a team in terms of how best to approach it. So, bear with us on that, but we're hoping to have more to report out. We'll certainly have more to report out at the next quarterly meeting, but we hope to have even, more even in the near term. Stakeholder engagement. There are a lot of requirements around stakeholder engagement. So we're engaging with Great Plains Institute Environmental Support Division here at Eagle to develop a comprehensive stakeholder engagement strategy, coordinating with the Office of Environmental Justice Public Advocate as well. It requires a preliminary greenhouse gas inventory for the priority climate action plan and a comprehensive greenhouse gas inventory for the comprehensive climate action plan. Luckily, we were already working on that, and Sarah Hutchinson on our team is really leading that work and has been developing our work plan. And we just got together a whole bunch of folks from across the interagency to start gathering data and working through the modules just here in May. There's a required benefits analysis for all of the measures that we would propose under either of these plans, and a low-income disadvantaged communities benefits analysis to help in the prioritization of activities, a priority action selection aligned with the My Healthy Climate Plan, and building off of the inventory, the benefits analysis, and the low-income disadvantaged communities benefits analysis. And then an included feature that gets back to that broader point I made at the beginning, identification of other federal funding opportunities aligned with the plan. So the plan here, meaning we're treating the My Healthy Climate Plan, the Priority Climate Action Plan, the Comprehensive Climate Action Plan, and eventually we want those to be basically one and the same. And so we're building on and refining them on a healthy climate plan. But it's a part of this funding opportunities. They expect us to go out and look at every available climate-related funding opportunity and to demonstrate how we're maximizing that. And how I think the intention in a lot of ways is that the climate pollution reduction grant competitive opportunity is meant to be additive to other resources already there. So that means that we have to search out the carbon reduction program dollars with MDOT that I know they're working on and make sure that we're aligning that in some way and maximizing those and showing EPA that that's happening. Same with a whole series of other opportunities, working with MDART on some of the USDA related funding that I think they'll mention later, but for example, is another path that we'll need to make sure we've evaluated as a part of implementing the plan related to climate pollution reduction grants. Cross-department coordination is a requirement as well. That'll continue to be, it's always a feature of our work and will continue to be regardless. And then there's some sub-awards. We've included some allocation for sub-awards to help with some of the stakeholder engagement and some of the planning at the local level. We'll have more information about that. And we're going to be seeking input on kind of all of these activities moving forward, but kind of working through what the exact details of that are. Likely some webinars, some in-person meetings, some potential public comments, things of that nature to help us inform. And then lastly, this isn't an activity, but you would maybe question how are we going to get all of this work done? We will be adding capacity, so there's consultants and staff that will be bringing on board there. And as those postings go live and the solicitations go live, we'll really lean on you all to help us make sure that we're getting that out to great groups of folks to help us out with this. So that's the major update for the state's approach to the climate pollution reduction grants. Obviously, a lot of it's a work in progress, and we're kind of taking it all as it comes and getting more information regularly. We have regular meetings with EPA every 2 weeks, and we've got another one this week where we'll likely go over the work plan in some detail. Any questions on the state approach? The next slide for folks' awareness is on the other qualifying entities that also qualify for the climate pollution reduction grants. So just to preempt any questions there, but any other questions on how we're approaching the climate pollution reduction grants or anything else on this topic?
You know when you'll find out?
About?
Whether or not you get it?
We get the 3 million.
Oh, that's done.
That's done, yeah.
Got it.
Yeah.
So it's just.
So it's a matter of like when the money flows. So they'll review our work plan for the 3 million. It's opt-in. So the 3 million was an opt-in amount that every state basically had the right to opt into and then submit a work plan against. And then I think maybe 4 states opted out, but the rest of the states definitely opted in. And then there's a pool of, if you divide that out, that doesn't get you, 3 million doesn't get you to 250 million. The other pool of planning resources are for tribes and local governments, for lack of a better phrase at the moment. But I'll get into that on the next slide.
So it's you put the plan together, work with them to get the okay, and then it goes into appropriations next year.
No, it's already in appropriation. Like it's in the FY23 budget proposal. So as soon as that's approved, and then as soon as the money flows from EPA, we'll be ready to get going. So you could expect, some of the position descriptions and postings and the potential solicitations for consultants and RFPs and stuff to start flowing very soon, because we have the ability to get started on that, and we know it'll take a little bit of time to get going. So we're all hands on deck trying to get that stuff together right now.
So Corey, I may have missed this, but with the 3 million over 4 years, your 2 deliverables are deliverable like by year 4, and then maybe I missed it, but the 4.6 billion, what's that?
The 4.6 billion competition, my understanding, is focused on, and again, we keep getting more information, and they have not released. I believe we'll get in the fall the actual NOFO or the FOA. But that is, my understanding is it's going to be probably, I don't think it'll all be at once. I think it'll be in tranches. I'd expect some additional guidance from UK on specific areas of focus. But I believe at least the initial phase is expected to be a focus on the priority climate action plan. That's why they're giving that deliverable, is come up with the things that you can do right now to do the most to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. We want to fund those things, and then do your comprehensive plan and come up with what all of the things are, is basically the kind of way they're thinking about it. That opportunity, like we have to have that priority climate action plan done by March of next year, by March 2024, in order to then have it available. And the prerequisite for that funding competition is you have to have a climate action plan, a priority climate action plan in hand to go along with your application. So that would lean toward us wanting the priority climate action plan to be rather broad, to give us flexibility for a bunch of different priorities from different communities, different stakeholders, to be able to be eligible under that first competition. And we'll kind of see how receptive folks are to kind of that broader approach. We've basically outlined that we anticipate focusing on electricity, buildings, and transportation. And we'll kind of see if it's possible we'll narrow. I know like the state of Pennsylvania is only doing heavy industry, which obviously is going to narrow who can qualify, and we're trying to keep ours a bit broader so that there are more communities have access to it, and because we truly are trying to have a statewide plan. All right, nothing further on the state strategy, and we can always come back to it if folks have more questions. So I mentioned or alluded to, the climate pollution reduction grants. There are other planning processes at play here, and they're staggered timelines. So ours is, we've submitted our work plan. Zach, when are the MSA's work plans due? 15?
Sounds right.
The tribes are definitely June 15th. I think the MSAs might be that as well. I think there's likely somebody from one of the qualifying MSAs on. Our understanding is that from the Grand Rapids Kentwood region, the Grand Valley Metro Council has submitted an NOIP with buy-in from local governments in that region. And then in the Detroit, Warren, Dearborn region, the SEMCOG, the Southeast Michigan Council of Governments, has submitted an NOIP and is undergoing a process to develop their work plan right now to submit. And so the state's timeline is slightly staggered ahead, but we'll be coordinating with these groups as they develop their plans. And the way that these interact, and this is an important note, and actually I'll really emphasize it, because this is a common misconception about how this works, and it's really can cause problems in some of the stakeholder engagement. The Metropolitan Statistical Area Plan, the tribal government plans are for those regions. It does not mean if you participate in that you do not participate in the state plan, and it does not mean you're not covered by the state plan. This has been happening a lot where folks are feeling like where some folks think that if they're not in a metropolitan region, or if they're in a metropolitan region, they can't participate in the state plan, or vice versa. That is not the case. The state plan covers all of the state of Michigan, and anything that's in our plan, any local government or qualifying entity can apply against, basically taking our plan. Where we want to make sure there's deep coordination is if there's something that's not going to be in our plan, or if there's something really regionally specific that's valuable to be the focus of a regional plan, and really dive deep on it. Like you could see an urban setting saying that they want to really focus in on mass transportation. That's probably not going to, that may be we may have that qualify under the umbrella of our priority climate action plan across the state, but it might be more detailed and more nuanced and more well thought out in a specific region about their specific context. And that does not mean that local government, if the state's process includes efficiency in buildings, it doesn't mean that anyone in that MSA couldn't apply with the state's plan to go after efficiency in buildings. So just trying to make sure that's clear, because I think as we do stakeholder engagement, we're trying to make sure we're as coordinated as possible with these regions, but don't want folks to feel like if they miss the boat on even participating in the MSA process or miss the boat in the state process, as long as you are covered by one of these, the real input piece is to make sure that the activities that you want to have your community be eligible for in the broader competition are included in one or more of the planning process.
Have these already been awarded? Or?
These are similarly, the money is not flowed, but similarly they are opt-in. So the two metropolitan statistical areas, they have opted in. Both of those have opted in and they're working through their strategy, and we're working to make sure we coordinate. The tribal governments, the ones listed here have opt-in in some manner. So you can see individual tribes have opted in, and then a consortium led by the Intertribal Council of Michigan has opted in as well, to our understanding. The issue, the uncertainty with the tribal governments is just that it's up to $500,000 a piece with $25 million available nationwide. Given that there are about 500 federally recognized tribes, you can divide that out and it's not going to be $500,000 a piece. So there's a question as to how much money is going to be available based on how much uptake there is for folks opting in. And so we're trying to make sure that, you know, if the number comes in way below that, that we're leveraging our larger number for our statewide plan to provide resources and support and economies of scale around things like a greenhouse gas inventory or a benefits analysis framework or something like that, as much as possible and as much as is needed. But we were really excited to see this level of interest from the tribes across Michigan, and obviously great that the metropolitan statistical areas, they were all over it and jumped right in our movement. So Frank, I think I see your hand up freshly.
Yeah, thank you. Our first, as the tribes, we're first hearing from EPA of about $60,000 to $130,000 per tribe in the region 5. So yeah, that's not the $500,000 number, but it's also not insignificant. So, but I know we're one of the ones, Little River is, with the Intertribal Council, and the coordination between our office and yours, Corey, will be significant. And I see that there are 4 tribes, it looks like, that aren't listed there. So I hope that they can also participate in some way through some coordination and communication, because I like you say, the state plan will cover those who haven't signed up. So anyway, that's what we're looking at from Indian country in the Great Lakes region. Thanks.
Great, yeah, and hopefully I didn't speak out of turn. I mean, this is a list we received from EPA, and they've been updating pretty publicly who's opted into various to the planning stage here. I think to be able to provide increased coordination. So yeah, and Frank, thank you for that. I think we're really excited to work with you all, and I hadn't heard that number. I will note, we've been putting in a decent amount of work to try and find additional resources, either within state government or, and included some pass-through money as a part of our limited amount of pass-through money as a part of our planning grant. But also my understanding is that philanthropy is looking to provide some additional resources, and I think at a significant level, to complement some of this in particularly focused on tribal government engagement. So hopefully that comes through, and we should probably have more conversations about that, Frank, as we go, as we have more support. So great. Any other questions on climate pollution reduction grants? We're running long, so I'm gonna go quick now. Greenhouse gas reduction fund. It's funny, I looked at the clock a few minutes ago and I was like, I'm running early, I'm good. And then I really got going there. So greenhouse gas reduction fund, this, again, you all heard the basics of this last time from Evergreen Action. It's $27 billion pool. So other than the tax credits, it is the largest single line item in the IRA. The framework that was released April 19th, there are two big things that came out of that. One is that originally it was a $20 billion pot and a $7 billion. They divided that out into this $14 billion for National Clean Investment Fund. That's really largely going to go toward nonprofit green banks and other related strategies around leveraging finance. through largely nonprofit institutions. And I believe there's going to be like 2 to 5 recipients of that nationwide, and then they'll serve as intermediaries, partially due to the rapid nature of these funds needing to get out the door and spent. The $6 billion for the Clean Communities Investment Accelerator, there's basically some debate as to whether you invest and build capacity within community development finance institutions and credit unions, or whether you invest in green banks and help them better reach communities that are often have lack of financial resources or lending institutions. And I think they basically kind of split that up and said, everybody's kind of doing both here. But our understanding is that the Clean Communities Investment Accelerator is largely focused on community development finance institutions. And there are a number of national CDFI groups that are helping coordinate that and go after that. I think if you divide $6 billion by the number of CDFIs in the country, it's about $5 million a piece, which there's some regulatory threshold about the amount of money that CDFIs are allowed to get in one go on something like this. So it's right around $5 million. So I think that that's the general intention, though it's unclear how that will look in practice. And then the big thing for the state here is the one that we are eligible for. So we're not eligible for those other two. We want to help provide a framework and a strategy for folks pursuing that in Michigan to help us implement the climate plan, help us implement the pieces coming from the climate pollution reduction grant planning process. But the $7 billion the state is directly eligible for, we're intending to pursue it. The big guidance update out of that framework is that it was renamed to Solar for All from Zero Emission Technologies. So you can see the focus here is solar. Energy storage would still qualify, and solar enabling upgrades would qualify. So roof replacements, things of that nature that often stand in the way of deeper decarbonization of buildings. But it really is focused on rooftop solar, community solar. And so that is something that we're working through a planning process. If we were to get the amount if you do a formula, and I don't know that, I think it's likely that states will receive the money. I don't think it'll actually be formulaic. But if the way that we would think about this, if it were formulaic, would be aligned with our clean water, the revolving fund and the drinking water revolving fund. Though we would get around like $290 million for the Solar for All program if that were to stay true. I don't know that that's, we have to apply, we have to develop a program, et cetera. And again, we'll be soliciting input on that. And we're working closely with Michigan Saves on all of these things as they're very active, particularly in that $14 billion pool. So we expect a FO or a no-FO coming out in June, and then it's going to be a pretty rapid turnaround, I think, to be pulling in some of the proposals, et cetera. So we've already started meeting across state government with a sprint team on this one. We've got Great Plains and ESD helping us with outreach. And our intern, Haley, is on today. This is going to be a focus of her work with us this whole summer. And she's joining us from the University of Michigan and their Ford School and I think C's as well. So really excited to have her. I think this is her second day. So I don't think it is her second day. So welcome.
Corey,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I know you're already running late. In looking at opportunities in the state for things like community solar and recognizing that there are some barriers, both regulatory barriers and I think maybe some might say legal barriers, how are you thinking about navigating that kind of stuff and how you're applying for the money?
Yeah, it's a really important question. I think there's actually quite a bit of flexibility in the framework that was put out. We did reply to an RFI, a request for information with a comment letter, just encouraging flexibility in the interpretation of what would be a community solar project and what constitute benefits. So for providing real benefits to communities, kind of having some flexibility around some of the structures, and also emphasizing our excitement about the roof replacement and deferral costs being eligible as a part of this, technical assistance, workforce investments, all of those are qualifying under the Solar for All program. That said, we do have legal framework challenges to some of the uptake. And I really hope that doesn't limit our ability to pursue this and the EPA doesn't look at it and say we're gonna send money there. And so we're trying to come up with any and all proposals we can that really leverage this opportunity and that'll make a compelling case when we do submit an application. But yeah, it's a great question and something that we're definitely kind of wrestling with how best to approach it.
Yeah, our utility partners would help with that.
We've been meeting with we met with Brandon and his team. We've met with DTE on this to understand some of the opportunities through existing programs and some of the community solar pilots and things of that nature. So those conversations are ongoing. And again, we're going to be asking for a broader conversation and feedback from folks as we look into this and figure out how to best pursue something for the state. So yeah, lots more opportunities for input to come, and appreciate any thought that folks are giving to this. We appreciate it at this moment because it's a big opportunity and a really exciting one for Michigan. And I think because of some of the legal frameworks, we do have to figure out how to really be thoughtful about it and make it as effective as possible.
Thanks.
Great. So I think I'm going to go ahead and give a quick summary of the climate conference. Trevor, I'll hand it to you, and then we'll try and abbreviate this just because I'm terribly behind schedule here. So though I think they were valuable updates and I appreciated the dialogue, I actually think it really enriched kind of the content here. So big sigh of relief from our team and the ESD team and tons of people. The My Healthy Climate Conference, which kind of got bigger and bigger as we went, and we added more and more activities as we went, to the point where it seemed absurd at times. We ended up with nearly 600 attendees. We sold out weeks before the conference. We had a wait list of 100 plus people, and we let a number of those folks in last kind of as spots opened up and as we made more room. But we had the sellout. We sold out before we announced the governor, the mayor, the lieutenant governor, or Senate Floor Majority Leader Singh, Quentin Messer. Like, we hadn't announced the vast majority of the speakers and we had sold out. So it was a pretty incredible showing of folks, and really grateful to everyone who attended. Tons of folks here spoke and really appreciated that. And again, appreciated all of the, as many of you as did coming to the luncheon beforehand. So some of the other pieces that are just exciting features about this, you can see that photo there that kind of captures a room. It was packed generally, and really a ton of energy in the space that we were excited about, and that's what we had hoped. We'd hoped to really pull folks together and build some momentum to move toward really, implementation and accelerating our action on climate. So we had morning working sessions. This is stuff that folks might not have seen, but our Eagle climate liaisons, so our internal climate team here at Eagle, we met and had a workshop there about how to best leverage the climate pollution reduction grants and priorities around action for the next year to implement the climate plan, with the intention of being able to announce things from Eagle at next year's conference, which we're excited about that as a year-long pathway there. Catalyst communities, so we have 30 to 40 local governments from all over Michigan that are working on climate come and have a workshop in Great Plains Institute, and Zach Richardson and the team. Great Plains was in the other room. University of Michigan, Zach and others all facilitated an incredible workshop and ended up with just an incredible set of notes pulled together, cataloging a whole bunch of input, whereas basically local government priority climate actions, how they align with the My Healthy Climate Plan, and then how those things could align and be coordinated around the climate pollution reduction grant process. So really valuable input. Some of the announcements that happened, and again, hopefully there's even more that comes from this over time, but we announced the My Healthy Climate Corps at the event. Climate pollution reduction grants, we had been awarded the money as of then, had opted in. And then again, it's not a My Healthy Climate Plan implementation package per se, but the Clean Energy Future package Senator Singh announced that at the reception that night before introducing it the next day, and a decent number of the pieces of legislation at least targeted a lot of our goals and objectives from the climate plan. So not exactly an implementation framework of the climate plan, but certainly exciting to see pieces of the climate plan represented in legislation, and obviously the subject of much conversation and debate moving forward. I'm excited to see that conversation happening. And then we're starting to plan for next year. So that is, unfortunately, we don't have that much time for this brainstorm, but we'll have lots of conversations on this. I am going to ask Trevor Drake from GPI to just ask for, kind of share any, kind of help facilitate any input or questions folks might have on the conference, or kind of what to think about for next year, reflections on it for those that attended, strengths, weaknesses, et cetera. And I'll hand it to Trevor to help facilitate that. And again, Trevor will say this, so sorry to steal your thunder, Trevor, but the open conversation portions of the meeting are really reserved for council members. So thanks for everyone who's attending. It's not a council member or a designee, but we're looking for feedback from the council members specifically. So Trevor.
Thanks, Corey. And maybe we can just do a quick time check. I know we've got John and then Jacob both set up to present. Corey, do we have enough time now to do some discussion, or should we go to them and come back later if there's time remaining?
Let's do that. Let's go to them and come back later. And I think everyone here knows that, you know, you have an open line of communication to us if you have particular feedback on the Miami Climate Conference or discussion. I apologize for us running over. That's on me, but I also did appreciate the conversation. I think it's helpful to give that some of the detailed updates on the federal funding. So as long as there are no objections, I'd make that adjustment. Yeah, Trevor, and we can go ahead and head there. And John, if you want to start getting ready here.
And Corey, you do have a question in the chat from Peck about whether there's a date for the 2024 climate conference.
Not yet, but it is on the list of things to figure out and lock in. And really, I will tell this just because it's fun, and then I'll really shut up. After the conference, I think somebody said, well, what are we doing next year? And I said, well, we can take a week and then we'll start planning, thinking that was like sort of being a little flippant and like a little like aggressive. And Jim corrected me. He said, we'll take tonight and then we'll start tomorrow. And so there's just a lot of enthusiasm from Eagle and from everyone who attended to see something like this. And again, and we know we can't do the same thing again. It needs to be focused on action, on progress, and can't simply be another kind of like get everyone together and rally the troops event. It can be that, but it needs to be more next time. So with that, I'll stop sharing my screen if you want to start sharing here.
So Corey, if I might jump in as John's getting his screen ready. So, you know, it was very evident when the governor came out with the Michigan Healthy Climate Plan that every department was asked to participate. And so the first thing that we did at MDARD is start asking our division leaders. We have 6 division plus executive team, leadership team. How many of you have heard of the Healthy Climate Plan? Hands were not going up in the room. You know, it was a news splash, a press release, and then there was not the call to action until you started with things. And so, you know, I began attending these meetings on behalf of Director McDowell then, and now on behalf of Director Boring, who would love to have been here today, but he's had other responsibilities. But what I will say is, in that time frame from when the plan came out to now, I'm not big on sharing incremental progress. I'd love to tell you where we need to be at the end, but I think it's important to share with all of the departments and with all of you that there are incremental steps to getting somewhere, and if you don't start, you don't arrive anywhere. And so for us, you know, learning that people who pay attention to state government didn't know about the plan was really interesting. Then when John and I started presenting to all the different divisions, anytime a few people were gathered, you know, John would bring a PowerPoint, not the one you're going to see today, share it, and then say, give me your feedback. instantly the staff became incrementally engaged, just continually. It's like, you know, the hallway conversations, the, hey, I have an idea. Oh, I'm doing this. Do you want to know more about it? And that just morphed into where we are today, which is still a long way from where we need to be. But the goal at MDARD is to be part of the report, to be part of the solution. We know that agriculture can get blamed for contributing to the problems. So now we want to be part of the solution. The Michigan Healthy Climate Plan in its entirety doesn't mention agriculture a lot. If you've read it page to page, you don't find us a lot in there. However, when we talk to our staff, they thought differently. You know, we do a lot of work in water quality. We do a lot of work in fuels. We do a lot of work, soil. So with that, I want to launch with my colleague, John Malik, who's our policy advisor, go into a short, and this is short, so we might be able to give you 5 minutes back, Corey. But quite honestly, the big thing that we found in our department, and this may be true of other departments, is heighten the awareness, build that foundation, and then go from there and figure out how do we capture the information in a reportable form. So you're going to see a little dabble of what we're doing now. But it's growing even beyond what we've today. I met with commodity groups yesterday, with ag leaders in Michigan yesterday, who are coming to us now and saying, you know, we would like to do a sustainability conference with you. Our customers are demanding this. So it's not only us thinking up what needs to be done, but it's the residents of the state of Michigan, people in our country, you know, nationwide, who are saying, we want better practices. We want these solutions. You know, we expect you to deliver them. And they're calling on their elected officials to do the same. So with that, MDARD is going to do our part. We're committed to that. Director Boring's committed to that. And that's trickling down. And there's rarely a conversation where we don't talk about the climate as a piece of any meeting we host. You know, I meet with division leaders regularly. What are you doing on climate? What are you doing? What's happening? And so it's going to be a part of every conversation, which continues to heighten that awareness, which continues to bring people to the table, new ideas, and our partners in the fields, you know, on the farms, near the water, in the soil, and that's going to be a big part of it. What did I want to mention here? You know, and sometimes state of Michigan can operate in silos. This isn't one of those times. This is one of those times where we all need to, you know, work with each other. And that's going to make the difference for when we incrementally reach our goals. We started talking, it was carbon neutrality, but then now we've expanded. So John, with that, introduce my colleague, John Malik, our policy advisor, who will take you through our brief PowerPoint.
Great, thank you, Kathy. So as Kathy said, my name is John Malik. I'm the policy advisor here at MDARD, and I will take you through MDARD's next steps on climate. First, we laid out a timeline and a blueprint for what would hopefully get us to work implementing the Michigan Healthy Climate Plan at MDARD. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention the collaboration, the assistance we received from Corey and his team at Eagle, Scott and his team at DNR, and a very dedicated group at MDARD who helped us. So moving into our blueprint here, our first step was to continue to educate on the Michigan Healthy Climate Plan, like Kathy said. We likely did 10, maybe a dozen presentations on the plan just internally at MDARD to make sure our staff knew what it was and what we were working towards. Next, we decided we needed a baseline of where we were on climate. We needed an internal accounting. We decided to do a survey of MDARD on the climate action taking place in the department at this time. We asked things like, what is being done in MDARD? What could be done? What obstacles are there to any of that work? And how do we quantify our progress moving forward? Our next step, which I'll get to later in the presentation, is moving forward and implementing ideas from the climate plan, or from our survey, sorry. But today we'll be discussing largely the results of our survey. A bit of background on the survey. We administered it through MS Forms, and it was open the majority of spring here in 2023. We sent it to all program managers and supervisors within MDARD, so that was about 80 staff. We received 46 responses back, so that was a response rate of about 50% or more. One of the first questions we asked was, how familiar are you with the Michigan Healthy Climate Plan? And mind you, this was after all of our presentations, and we were very happy to see fewer than 10% responded that they were not very familiar with the plan. So meaning 90+% were familiar with the plan at this point. So that was very heartening. Our next question was, have you observed any of the following climate-related changes? We wanted to gauge, is our staff seeing climate change show up in their daily work? Here are the results. You'll see the top line, a very fortunate 7 of the respondents said they had not observed any changes. But as you can see, the vast majority did see a variety of climate changes showing up in their daily work, from newer, more prevalent invasive species or diseases to changing plant and animal health issues. It was kind of across the board they saw things showing up. Next, we asked, what kind of work do you do in your program area that might touch on climate, directly or indirectly? And again, as Kathy said, this started as carbon reduction, emissions reduction, but we asked this question quite broadly. Do you do any work in climate mitigation, climate adaptation, improving soil health and water quality, food security and access, infrastructure, emergency preparedness? And here are the responses. Oh, it was a little smoother in our practice, but yeah, thank you. So as you can see, there was a huge response to this question. MDART staff do a lot of work when it comes to climate. And as I said, we made it a broad question, but there was a lot that came up. And lastly, I have emergency management and preparedness there only because that showed up in almost half of the responses. MDART has a huge hand in emergency preparedness and response. So hopefully we can leverage that moving forward. Next, we asked, okay, so you do all this climate work, but how do you track it? What metrics do you use? The answer was yes, MDART does track it. And here are some examples. Through surveys, through the number of samples obtained and compliance checks, acres enrolled, and so on. However, we also received some interesting responses that gives us some room for improvement. Here's some examples that we saw. We use a variety of metrics to measure success and progress, but none of them directly identify as carbon sequestration, forest resilience, or climate change. So perhaps we could tweak some of our metrics to better capture what we're looking for. Here's another one. Each grant measures unique objects, goals, and tasks. However, we currently do not have universal questioning on climate smart practices or actions. So perhaps we could standardize some of our metrics to better track across programs. Next, we have not historically made it a priority to track these measures. However, we may have the ability to do so on a limited basis. So maybe we just need to prioritize tracking in some areas. And lastly, not specifically, we need more resources and tools built to track these metrics. Also, we haven't been instructed to do so. So perhaps we need to prioritize tracking and lead on this and say, this needs to be done. Also, we need more resources and tools to be able to do this.
And I do want to interject right here. We are instructing to do so since this point. You know, you receive results like this. You don't sit back and say, well, when will we do that? Next year? No, this is, you know, Director Boring, the governor have made this a priority, and now it's our ability to respond to that and say, okay, what do we have to do to make this happen?
Next, we asked, what kind of barriers are there to taking climate action? And we received quite a few responses to this question. Again, a fortunate 6 or so said there were no barriers to taking climate action. However, the remaining respondents had a variety of options to say. I would like to highlight one here. We have lack of direction from leadership. In discussing what these results could mean, Kathy and I noted, you know, if we were to take this survey again and administer this exact question in a year, we would hope this lack of direction from leadership would be a big fat 0. Only because, you know, with the Michigan Healthy Climate Plan, the work from the governor, the new legislature, funding and things from the federal level, and our director, Tim Boring, this leadership at all levels is relatively new, especially to all align at once in a given time. So this truly is a new phenomenon we're experiencing here, and we need to take advantage. Now is the time. And also, moving forward on climate at the department, we acknowledge that we need to address all of these barriers that popped up to really make meaningful progress. Next, we asked respondents, where could MDARD do more? And we asked them to think big and bold here. No option was too small or too big. We just asked them, like, where can we do more? What are we missing? And there was a lot of responses to this question, and we kind of grouped them into these buckets. First, look at our own footprint. One of the things that came up a lot was MDARD staff that are field-based drive a lot, whether they're doing inspections from farm to farm, food processor to food processor, and they drive a lot. They put a lot of miles on. So how can we make our fleet more fuel efficient or even upgrade to electric vehicles? Next, promoting virtual or continued use of hybrid meetings. This kind of ties into reducing miles traveled if we can. Developing climate best practices to become a climate resource. Staff said they received a lot of questions from stakeholders saying, I want to be more environmentally sustainable, but I just don't know what to do. If MDARD could be that resource to direct them to best practices, that could be a meaningful impact. Next, create a comprehensive message on climate and follow through. This kind of harks back to the leadership thing. If we have a solid message that we just bring up time and time again, as Kathy said, climate comes up in every conversation now. That's huge. So we just need to continue that. More funding. What was interesting, staff didn't bring up that it was necessarily a lack of funding. It was a lack of prioritized funding specifically on climate. So a lot of staff said they were strapped. They were at capacity doing their work. If we add climate work on top of that, that might be just slightly too much more than they can handle. So perhaps we need to incorporate more dedicated full-time employees to this sort of thing. Next, we had streamlining applications. MDARD oversees a lot of applications and licenses. Some of those applications are still administered on paper. Some of this is done for accessibility reasons. Not everyone has access to a computer or internet, but providing the option of an electronic route would be huge to reducing paperwork, reducing time, and things like that. Leveraging our resources. A number of staff pointed out, MDARD is a consumer. We procure things. If we're procuring lunch for a meeting, are we going to source that lunch from a location that provides lunch in styrofoam containers that then just get thrown out? It may sound like a small thing that inconsequential, but it can have a big impact over time, especially with a department the size of MDARD. As Kathy drinks some more coffee. Next, we have soil health and soil health. I don't know if you guys know, but soil health is really important. A lot of staff mentioned the huge importance of MDARD stressing the proper use of fertilizers and pesticides, best soil health practices such as cover crops and eliminating till if possible or no-till practices to improve soil health. So that's moving to the top of our agenda. And finally, more research into critical areas, such as on PFAS, biosolids, and nutrient runoff. This is one area where we will have to leverage our partnerships with MSU, with conservation districts, with other departments across the state to achieve some of this. These are kind of the emerging areas where a lot can be done to improve climate and to improve things like water quality and soil health. The last question we asked on the survey, and this one really, I guess, made me quite happy. We asked if anyone would like to explain their answers in greater detail or to continue the conversation after the survey. Of the 46 respondents, 14 said yes. So I'm currently in the process of reaching out to these 14 one-on-one to learn more about what they have to say, more about their work, more about their passions in this work that MDARD does, and to see their ideas. Where can MDARD do more? So this is a continuing conversation. That just because the survey is done doesn't mean we're necessarily done. So here we are back to our next steps. We're now moving into number 3 here, assessing and prioritizing and working towards implementing the Michigan Healthy Climate Plan goals. So where does MDARD go from here? We're going to continue analyzing our results. We're going to develop focus areas for climate action to move forward. We're going to work on capturing, quantifying, and reporting the good work we're already doing. And we're going to explore things like possibly implementing an MDARD climate policy and discovering ways that we can implement climate in every program, not just like one from the top policy. We're also going to look into more stakeholder engagement. How do we engage our partners, our commodity groups, and so on? And then possibly a broader MDARD climate working group. How do we engage across the department on climate? How do we engage across other departments with Corey, with DNR, and so on? So these are all things we're going to look at now moving forward. Finally, Corey asked me to touch on several federal funding opportunities. The three that I'm going to talk about today are actually all from USDA. The first one here is REAP, Rural Energy for America program. This is actually a program that started with the 2018 Farm Bill, but it's kind of been turbocharged through the Inflation Reduction Act. It was refilled, so to say, with $2 billion worth of money. This grant will provide grants and loans for energy efficiency improvements and renewable energy systems, specifically for rural areas. Target recipients are ag producers and rural small businesses. So this is a big one. Next, we have the new ERA program, Empowering Rural America. I'm not exactly sure why they call it the new ERA, but I do think the Department of Energy had an ERA grant like a couple months ago. So I think USDA came up with the same acronym and just called it the new one. So this program gives partially forgivable loans for renewable energy systems and carbon capture systems. The target recipients are rural electric cooperatives, and this one's quite large at $9.7 billion. And it has a 10-year horizon, or sorry, an 8-year horizon to spend the money. Lastly, we have PACE, or Powering Affordable Clean Energy Program. Similar to the new ERA, this is partially forgivable loans for large-scale renewable energy projects and storage. Target recipients include energy developers and electric service providers, as well as electric generators. This has a price tag of about $1 billion. USDA likes to point out that between the new ERA and PACE, the two together represent the single largest investment in rural electrification since President Roosevelt's Rural Electrification Act into law in 1936. So this is a big deal. MDARD's role with these grants, none of these grants allow MDARD to be an eligible recipient directly. However, our department does still have a role, specifically through our Office of Rural Development, in mostly getting the word out through education and outreach efforts and offering assistance where needed. This is also where the Office of Rural Development's work on capacity building comes into play. They've been working for about a year now since the office came into being, the Office of Rural Development, to help farmers, small businesses, and small communities learn how to find and apply for grants and kind of learn how to meet requirements related to grants and as well as meet those tight deadlines. It's also important to point out, these are just 3 grants I'm mentioning through USDA, but through the Inflation Reduction Act, USDA also received $20 billion specifically for conservation-related grants. So those are filtering through currently. And there's also numerous grants related to food systems and food supply chain resiliency. So there's a lot of money right now. Funding is basically not an issue at the moment, largely when it comes to conservation and agriculture, at least, and rural energy as well. So these are all things MDARD is tracking. The new ERA and PACE specifically that I talked about were only recently announced in the last few weeks. So there's more information to come on those, and we'll be tracking those and getting the information out as we can. So this concludes the presentation. If you do have any questions for me or Kathy, I've included my email here on the slide. We'd be happy to take any questions or providing more information.
Thank you. If anyone has any burning questions, we could take 1 or 2, but then we got to get to Jacob so he can roll. And if you're willing to follow up offline with questions, that would be ideal, just so that we can give Jacob as much time as possible.
You know, Corey, the one thing I want to leave everyone with is we're happy to answer questions, but this is a work in progress. This is us coming and saying, You know, we went from 0 to this point in just a few months. So what is possible in this climate war? You know, if everyone, you know, like at the conference, it's like, this is, everyone needs to participate. How much can agriculture contribute to this? We still don't know. But if we didn't do our part and the next department or the next area didn't do their part, or a city or a county, we wouldn't get to the aggressive goals that we're seeing. And so this small part, just beginning, we look forward to being included in the agenda next year, or even 6 months from now, and saying, okay, here's some of the quantifiable results that we can share with you. And I just want to applaud John. He's taken this as a project that he is going to build a good foundation at MDARD with, and I will tell you, he will be known for climate work.
Awesome. Thank you. Nice job. And I'm going to hold you to that. It sounds like you've got a whole track at next year's conference. All right, great. So Jacob, I think you have screen sharing capabilities, is that right?
Yeah, I believe so. Let me just make sure this will work. Hi, everybody. Great to see you. Can you see that all right?
Yeah. Yep.
Awesome. Well, I'm Jacob Corviday from RMI, also founded as Rocky Mountain Institute. For those unaware, we're a global nonprofit organization working on clean energy transition. But I am a Michigan born and bred devotee always, and spent most of my life in Michigan, including a good number of years as the executive director of EcoWorks in Detroit. So I'm really happy to join you all here today. I'm going to keep this really brief. The thing I'm tasked to look at here really is really highlighting for you all the opportunity with the tax credits in the Inflation Reduction Act, or IRA. And so I just want to walk through some things here, and this will be a pretty high level piece. Some of you may be familiar with all this already, but the opportunity here is huge, and I really want to stress the range of what's possible here. And if we have time, get into some of where we might go with that. So first thing is just to understand that IRA exists within a larger context of a much bigger set of bills from the federal government, which includes the bipartisan infrastructure bill and the CHIPS Act. This is just a quick breakdown here. I'm not going to go into detail right now, but looking at like between all of these, there's a tremendous amount of funding combined together to really drive the clean energy transition in a variety of ways. But as you'll also see, a huge piece of that is really focused around IRA and the tax credits. So to put a little finer point on it, of all of the things in IRA, according to the estimates coming from the federal government, about 70% of the climate provisions within IRA are around the tax credits themselves, right? So the rest are grants and other programs. So the tax credits really are the biggest chunk of IRA, and as much as IRA is the largest piece of climate legislation yet passed in the world, the tax credits are the main body of that. So within Michigan specifically, the opportunity, this is a quick chart just sort of showing, we looked at the sort of baseline assumption of how much of this could come to Michigan. That's the darker teal color at the bottom. This is what came out of the federal government's estimates. But we've looked at what is the potential in Michigan, and that's the lighter teal color that goes, as you see, much, much larger. Again, the biggest opportunity here is in IRA, but all of this indicates that there's a huge opportunity. And to specifically point it out, in Michigan, if this was all tackled as much as it could be, it could mean $26 billion available in state investment in the state just from federal dollars. And the majority of that is money that Michigan is not sending to the federal government, right? In terms of maintaining those tax credits, keeping those dollars circulating internally in the state. From that piece alone, 33,000 potential jobs, tremendous amount of improved health outputs, et cetera. So, and the other thing is that 26 billion does not even include the amount of private investment that could come in and match that from these tax credit uptake, nor does it include the manufacturing investments that we're already seeing. Michigan is one of the leaders in the country right now at attracting that sort of manufacturing investment, which is partly kicked off by the tax incentives as well. So quickly, we think there's a variety of roles that the state has for helping tackle really making maximum use of the Inflation Reduction Act, from supporting these tax incentives, to making good use of the grant programs, as Corey and others have been talking about, and that this really changes the economic landscape in a way that may enable more policies and programs to build on what IRA has made possible. But what we're focusing on here is the tax credits. So 3 potential challenges, and I'm just going to give a quick overview of the what's available in the credits themselves. To be aware, the big challenges we're seeing in states across the U.S. right now around deploying this is, one, awareness. Similar to what the good folks at MDARD were talking about with the climate plan, if you talk about these new tax credits, most folks just don't have any idea that they're available to them. Secondly, capacity and tools to actually apply for funds or access them easily and knit it together when there's multiple pieces that put together. And then essentially lack of alignment with existing programs, right? You have existing programs in state, either from the state itself, from municipal governments, from utilities, and those programs don't always neatly align. And so that's another thing that we think is a real opportunity for helping people improve uptake of this. So let's, for now, focus on awareness and just really lay out what the opportunity is seeing here in Michigan. I will note, we have produced a spreadsheet available to anyone that looks at all the provisions of the Inflation Reduction Act. There's a separate tab specifically for the tax provisions. It is sortable by type of entity, by sector, energy sector, that sort of thing. So tribal governments, for example, you can go and just select tribal governments and see the things that are relevant to tribal governments, and similar for nonprofits, businesses, et cetera, to just quickly hone in on what's most relevant. I will walk through some of the details here, specifically in terms of electricity. For consumers, you've got up to 70% of a tax, up to a 70% tax credit on community solar for low-income projects. And then in general, residential programs, this is extending an existing 30% tax credit, but now includes battery storage. For private industries, it's the huge opportunity through the inflation, through the Energy Infrastructure Reinvestment Funding, through the Loan Program Office. This is massive funding available to help primarily our utilities transition over to clean energy. There's ways to use this financing to do so in a way that not only benefits the utilities bottom line, but also can lower costs for ratepayers. This is really critical to know for the utilities themselves, but also for organizations like, the Public Utility Commission, to be aware of how this may change the economics of what's possible in terms of the integrated resource planning that they do. So that's the main piece. That's on top of, that's a huge lending opportunity on top of a massive investment and production tax credit available for renewables, including storage. So, and then as we already heard the folks at MDARD talk about amazing new opportunities from the USDA to help the rural co-ops, I'll leave that there since they already covered it. That's electricity alone. One other thing I want to note on the electricity piece that's new in this tax credit is that it is now available through a program called Direct Pay. Folks who don't have any sort of tax liability can now make use of these tax credits as well. This is huge. It means the state, municipalities, schools, churches, other faith institutions, any nonprofit organization can now make use of those tax credits in a way that they couldn't before. So that's a whole new thing that people should be aware of. Transportation, again, just quickly, $7,500 tax credit for new electric vehicles. There's some specific parameters around that, but also, and this is critical, there's now a $4,000 tax credit for used electric vehicles to help support the electric, so the resale value and the lower cost used vehicle market there. In the private space, there's things for sustainable aviation fuel, heavy duty vehicles, and cleaning those up, and commercial vehicles. So again, really critical, any business in Michigan that has any kind of fleet can now get money to get vehicles that will cost less to maintain, usually more to cost by front, though not always, but will cost less to maintain, provide cleaner things, and help them with a variety of both operational and carbon goals in that space. Buildings. For new residential, there's a tax credit for building homes better. This can make it so that building all electric buildings, from the analysis we've done in the past, cost competitive, in fact, at cost parity with standard build in Michigan now. There's also an energy efficiency tax credit available for making improvements to existing buildings. So those are both huge. In the private sector, again, massive pieces available for upgrading existing commercial buildings. And then really quickly, in industry, I'm just going to quickly hit, there's hydrogen tax credits, carbon sequestration. Probably the big one to note here is the Advanced Industrial Facilities Deployment Program. This is programs to help any industry actually improve its operations or processes for cleaner effect. I'm going to skip these other ones for right now. I do want to note the Advanced Manufacturing Production Tax Credit. This is part of what's supporting some of the new manufacturing work appearing in Michigan already. There's more potential there. And the Advanced Energy Project Tax Credit. So lots of places for industry to clean up what they're doing, to have great improvements, and have someone else help pay for things that wouldn't have happened otherwise. I'm going to stop there. Would love to discuss more at some point with everybody what this would look like to really boost uptake of all of this in Michigan. But that's it for now. So thanks for your time.
Thank you, Jacob, and apologies for having to narrow your window here, but also incredible job getting through all of that, and really helpful to see it all laid out here. And I already know that spreadsheet that you provided is deeply valuable for us in our work. If anyone has a quick question for Jacob, we could entertain one or two, but we will have to call it in about 3 minutes here.
There's a question.
Oh, that's for John.
Yeah, we could comment on that one, Corey, if you like, really quickly. The governor's recommended budget has $10 million for regenerative ag. Thank you. We agree 100%. And that was something we put forward to the Office of the Budget. And we are working with the legislature to support that. And I anticipate that you will see some exciting things coming out of the legislature on that front. So thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you, everyone. I see Marnice is taking it to the road here. I love it. So thank you, everyone, for joining. Thank you, Jacob, for that rapid and thorough presentation. Thank you to the MDARD team. I also wanted to just say a big thank you to everybody that helped with the climate conference, especially our environmental support division here at Eagle, the team at OCE, and then also to all the different departments that sponsored. It really was a statewide thing, and I forgot to mention that, but MDARD sponsored, DNR sponsored, MEDC sponsored, DHHS sponsored, Eagle sponsored. We had lots of participation from across state government. So we will follow up for our next meeting and provide any additional next steps via email. I won't try and go through anything right now. I would expect us to invite Jacob back as some of the rules and guidance on these tax credits come out. There will actually be more to dive into even. So this is like, a lot of that's high level, but there's a lot of guidance coming through the IRS, and we won't know how to take full advantage of a lot of those until that IRS guidance comes through, particularly on like direct pay and some of those things. So we'll have Jacob back, but appreciate the primer here and appreciate everyone joining. And with that, I think we can go ahead and call it. Thank you, everyone. It's exactly 3 o'clock. Thanks for joining. And we'll see you in a few months.
Do you need a motion to adjourn?
Do we need a motion to adjourn? Motion to adjourn. Made and second. Great.